we've made it to the end of 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to our annual book review.
I am excited. It's funny how much this has grown, because originally we just kind of flippantly did it a few years ago.
Yeah.
And then now it's yet again become a tradition.
And every year we're like, okay, we'll do them throughout the year so there are not so many books to talk about. And then it just never happens.
So
I think once it happened.
Yeah, this is probably a long one. We'll link some of our favorite books we mentioned down below. Mm-hmm. But I mean, it's going to be a lot. I'm not talking about all the ones I read.
No.
I'm going to highlight through, but it's still going to be a lot of books.
Yeah.
Same for you.
Yeah. There'd be some that, exactly. I'm going to skip over some big chunks. I'll show them, but then we'll move on from there. How did you do on your goal? Did you hit your goal yet?
So my goal we both use Goodreads. We get questions about, like, can we follow you on Goodreads? What?
This is the thing that happened a couple of years ago. We were talking about Goodreads when we specifically learned that we hadn't been filming this. Anyway,
we're on Goodreads, and we don't make ours public because it's like the only bit of privacy we have left. So anyway, I know you might ask, but anyway, my goal was 35.
Mm-hmm.
If I finish the book I'm currently reading, will meet that goal.
Which you should have said it. You're pretty close, right?
Yeah, I have one book left, and that's the one.
No, I mean, you're almost finished with that book, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yes, I will meet the goal, but I think I want to scale. Well, let's talk about yours, and then we'll talk about our.
So the last couple of years I've had my goal set at 50, and I think a couple of years ago I hit right at 50. Last year I hit 55. This year I hit 51. Mm-hmm. But so this is what we've been talking about. I think next year we're both going to scale our goals back, because what happens is, if I'm getting behind on my goal, I'll pick shorter books just so I can catch up to my goal. Or like at the end of the year, I'll pick real short books. Ones that were already on my list that I wanted to read, but I might be passing over ones that I wanted to read more just so that I could get to my goal. And so there's a few that, like Bridges of Madison County, I read towards the end of the year because it was really short. And I'm like, I wanted to read that eventually, and I liked it. I'll talk about it. But I skipped over other books that I wanted to read. And I have a few books that are big daddy books that I never ever grab because I'm like, well, it's going to put me behind on my goal.
Yeah, same. Like, literally, to finish up my goal this time, I was like, what I really wanted to read was just like a really juicy novel this last few weeks. But I ended up grabbing really short things just because, that same reason. I'm like, I'm this close to my goal. So a lot of people recommend doing a page goal. And that's something to consider. But to me, I don't know. It doesn't quite have the feeling I want. Yeah. But I get that. And it probably, especially in your situation, Tyler, it would work. But I'd also be curious how you compute that.
Well, even still, a page goal, looking at something like Les Mis, there are so many more words on this page than on...
Yeah, but I mean, that's...
this book, which is by Steve Martin. It's like 12 words on this page.
Yeah, I read that one in like 2 nights. So even
that's not a perfect system. There's no perfect system.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm going to do this year is maybe even like 25. And this year, I'm going to specifically read all those giant books that I keep not grabbing. Like, I have a giant biography on Winston Churchill. I want to read Moby Dick. I want to read all these other like giant classics that I won't read because I'm afraid to get behind on my goal.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the books.
Hold on, one more thing. We said if we then get to our goal, say it's September, and we hit our goals, then we can adjust from there. But then we're not constantly trying to get to our stride.
We've just talked about this so much, just us. Let's talk about it again. I know, I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, I forget.
They haven't heard it.
We have this conversation, like, we've had it on repeat for 10 days.
Yeah. Anyway, all right. So.
All my books I read on a Kindle. There's a few I read in an actual book form, but generally all mine were on Kindle. You read yours on Kindle, but you also read
the actual books. And somebody brought this up, and I never heard this term before, and I absolutely love it. And somebody said, I also collect book trophies, and I feel so seen, or something like that. And I'm like, that's exactly what it is. It's like, that's my trophy. I read that book. It's up on the shelf. You see that book? Look at my trophy. I read that book. And I'm like, I love that idea.
I don't know what we're going to do, though, Tyler. You keep reading at this rate. I'm like, bro.
Yeah, well.
We're going to run out of room. We'll
figure it out.
Anyway, okay. So no particular order. We're kind of going in the order we read them-ish.
Right, yeah.
I'm going to skip a few. 1, 2, skip a few, 99, 100.
Exactly. I'm just going to say the same thing. Yeah,
okay.
There's a few I can kind of blast through here pretty quickly. Well, here, I'll start because I had more.
Yeah.
So this one is just a really fun book. I think I literally read it in one sitting, and I just love Steve Martin, but it's called Number One is Walking, My Life in the Movies and Other Diversions. And they're literally just like little comics. And he's it's all like words by Steve Martin, and then there's an illustrator that did it. But they're funny jokes, and then it's some of his stories from different movies that he was in and stuff like that. It's really entertaining. Like I said, really quick read. And if you like Steve Martin or any of his movies, it was a very fun little quick read.
That's one of the ones I read, as well, right at the beginning of the year. I think if you don't care about Steve Martin, you would not need to read it.
No.
It's also one that's like cool to own because it's got all these pictures and it's very, very fast. So if you were trying to meet a goal, it's a good one. I definitely chuckled out loud with a few
of them. Yeah.
Certainly a unique book.
You know what I think the biggest thing I learned when I was going through my books this morning? I think the theme of this year, books that I was really excited to read, I didn't like all that much. And books that I was like, yeah, I guess I'll pick it up and read it, I ended up really liking.
Maybe it's that your expectations.
It could be. But, yeah, I had great expectations.
Yeah. So the first book I read last year, or this year, was, I must say, My Life as a Humble Comedy Legend by Martin Short. I knew of Martin Short, obviously, and I'd seen him in different things. You're going to laugh. The reason I know who Martin Short is was because he was in Father of the Bride, and I love Father of the Bride Part 1 and 2. I've obviously seen him in many more things since. But I was so surprised at how much I loved that book. One of my favorite memoirs, and it's funny because he is funny, but he's gone through some tragedy in his life, and reading about that and the way he's healed from that was really beautiful, and it's kind of changed my perspective on certain things when it comes to that, and I was just so pleasantly surprised by how good that memoir was. So if you are in need of just a good, meaty memoir, that is one. Not meaty, that sounds like it was easy to read. I would recommend that one.
That's the one I read last year. I was like, you have to read it. It's so good.
I'm so glad I did.
Like I said, it's parts where like laugh out loud funny. They were just interesting hearing about a lot of, celebrity friends and stuff like that.
Oh, yes.
And then there were
lots of tea, but like funny tea about celebrity friends.
And he's just so funny. I remember Phil Rosenthal talking about him one time, and they said, in a room of funny people, Martin Short is always the funniest person in the room.
I fully believe that. And of course, I also love him and Steve Martin in Only Murders in the Building. That makes it even more fun.
Oh, so good.
Okay.
Okay, this is one that I had really high hopes for, and I didn't like all that much, called Creativity, Inc. It was all about the Pixar story, essentially, from Ed Catmull, who was, he was not on the creative side, he was more on the business side. I enjoyed it. I think it was fine. But it's interesting because he talks so much about how Pixar's whole thing is good storytelling, but he was not necessarily himself a great storyteller.
He's like, well, I don't work for Pixar.
And I like business books too, but even still, I didn't find it all that fascinating. It was interesting enough, and if you really like Disney, Pixar, and you find that whole world interesting, I think it's probably worth a read. But I was a little let down because I've been wanting to read it for a very long time too. I mean, come on, look at that cover.
Had a good title too.
Who wouldn't want to read that? It's got Buzz Lightyear on the cover.
As a conductor. Okay, first novel I read of the year was The Lost Summers of Newport, and it's by 3 different people: Beatrice Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White. Oh, nice. You ended up reading this too, or no?
No, it's on my list to read this year. Well, if I end up reading short books.
Easily one of my top few favorite novels I read this year. First of all, my brother used to live in Newport, so we already just have happy memories there, and so I just wanted to read it. I don't think it matters if you've ever been to Newport, Rhode Island. It is about this mansion from like the Gilded Age that is now kind of dilapidated, and someone's going in with her show to like do a show about it, fix it up. But there's this recluse that like lives there, the heiress that like owned it, and it goes back in time, and you hear her story. Like, I'm getting the goosebumps talking about it. I would read this again. It just had it all. It was interesting. There was history. There was intrigue and drama. There was romance. Like, it's got it all. It's so cool that these 3, I think they did it from 3 different times. Like, you would go between, and each writer wrote the different time. I was going to say time zone. Time and history. Absolutely loved it. Would totally read another book by these 3. It looks like they were the authors of All the Ways We Said Goodbye. I might add that to my list. Not even knowing what it's about, just because I really liked this format.
I love Newport so much.
I know.
And I think that's just such a cool idea to have 3 different writers write sort of from different...
Well, anything that goes back in history and does that, ooh, count me in.
I love that. I think that's such a cool idea. I definitely want to read that.
Yeah.
Taste by Stanley Tucci, I actually really enjoyed. Pretty quick read. He talks about, obviously, his life in movies and all that kind of stuff, but he also talks a lot about food because he's sort of not transitioning from actor to foodie,
but like a little bit.
Kind of is.
Like totally is.
And just how food has always been a part of his life, and then he actually ended up losing his taste. He had oral cancer at some point, and so it's fascinating in that regard. But I mean, come on. Who doesn't love Stanley Tucci?
I know. There's something about him that's just...
He's just...
ever likable.
Love me some Tooch.
Give me some Tooch. If you hear, by the way, our kiddos, my parents are here playing with them upstairs right above us. So you may hear.
Yells, footprints.
I can hear the footfalls. Okay. Trigger warning, talking about like alcohol. So this book, Drinking Games by Sarah Levy, who, by the way, I totally thought, is that the like Dan Levy, part of their family? No, different. I read this because we've kind of redefined our relationship to alcohol. We still drink, but we're just choosier about it. We're different. Our mindset is different about it. And we've talked about that in the past. We're not going to go into it. But it was fascinating because it really did talk through, like, I think there is a time in adulthood, like if you were in college age and you went to parties and did that whole thing, you do have to transition into adulthood and at some point change your relationship to alcohol. And I think that's harder for some people than others. And so reading her story, I mean, that's not all it's about, but just reading about all of that, I found really fascinating. It was one of those books that really helped me as we were kind of redefining what we want that to look like in our adult lives. Yeah, I don't think the book is for everyone, but I think if you're kind of on that spectrum where you're like, I should probably adjust or re-look at that, you might like that book.
Yeah.
That's
nice. So here, I'll go through a couple quick biographies here. So this is one we read together actually at the same time.
Yeah, we listened to him read it.
And it's interesting because...
So first of all, Matthew Perry's
book. It's Matthew Perry's, yeah, sorry.
It's a terrible thing.
Yeah. I think I didn't love it.
I actually really did. But it is just so haunting.
Yeah.
We had very different reactions to it. He obviously talks about his issues and stuff, but it's just so haunting now, having read it, and obviously him passing away.
This was before that happened, yeah.
But just, I don't think I've ever read a book that so deeply goes into an addiction like he had, and just viewing it from different viewpoints. Because it does sound like he actually helped a lot of people with their own addictions. But yeah, it's a heavy book, and it would be odd to read it now. I think
it would be very different to read it now, almost sort of, in a haunting way. Yeah. But it was unbelievable what he was doing, even like while Friends was going on. Like,
he was able to pull off while dealing with this addiction.
And stuff that, should have killed a normal man, he would do every day.
I don't know that book is for the faint of heart, but yeah that's my thoughts.
Okay, so Tom Felton's Beyond the Wand. I loved this book. I thought it was utterly fascinating. Obviously, he talks about, his own life and his brothers and all that kind of stuff. He talks about, this is when we read together, actually. Yeah. He talks about obviously the Harry Potter movies and stuff like that, but then his personal journey sort of at the end. And it was just fascinating. And what's funny is I really like this book, and one of the things that really sticks with me is how he talked about Daniel Radcliffe and how it's obviously his book. But what sticks with me is him talking about Daniel and how he had to basically hold this entire franchise together, and he did it. You know what I mean? And how this huge weight was on his shoulders, and he just carried it off with such... Daniel
Radcliffe did, yeah.
I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
It was really nice to hear him say those kind things about him.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times in memoirs, people like to share, like I said, the tea.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see someone like supporting someone else that,
But it was
I liked it too. It wasn't like a favorite memoir of mine, but I was interested beginning to end.
Yeah.
I will say.
Yeah. This was my favorite biography of the year. Favorite is maybe not the right choice. This was not the right choice of word. This was the most interesting book I read this year. Unbelievable.
Was that my winner last year?
It might have been. This is one that I had pretty low expectations for, and then I read it, and I cannot believe how fascinating this book was. The stuff she has gone through.
But it's not even, and it's also just interesting hearing the life of like a child star. I think that was part of what was so fascinating to me, is what that actually looks like and how it happens and what it was like for her. I didn't even watch any of these shows she was on. Was it iCarly or whatever?
Something, yeah.
She talks about Ariana Grande in there. Like it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, and sad.
Yeah.
But
it's funny because just the other day I was at the store and they had this book up and I heard these two, like, I don't know, 25-year-old guys saying, like, oh, I'm sure that book's terrible. It's like,
joke's on you guys.
You have no idea how good this book is.
Very
it is a page turner.
Yeah. You can, I listened to the audiobook of it and you hear her reading it, and it is definitely very powerful hearing her.
Yeah.
This surprised me. I read it because my friend Megan it was one that she had recommended. It's called A Quiet Life by Ethan Joella. It's a novel, and it's about these 3 different people that are all kind of going through something really hard and how their stories intertwine. It's one of those books. But the sweetest storyline is this older man who's grieving his wife who died, and he was about to go on their yearly trip, and he's trying to decide, should I do it or should I not? But how, like, other people in his life that weren't even a part of his life, like, how they ended up helping each other get through these things. And it really is a very sweet story. It definitely can, it's a tearjerker, but it's a really sweet story. So, and I feel like it's a good winter read. It kind of gives the feel, so it was a novel that surprised me. It was not one that was on my radar, but I really, really liked it.
Yeah, yeah. She recommended another one.
I get a lot of recommendations from her.
Gosh, now I can't think of what it was. But I'll hear. Now that I brought that up, I have to look it up because I wrote it down. That she said is like her favorite book. And she's, I think her goal this year was like,
oh my gosh,
60, and she hit 100. She's read 100 books this year.
So
but she said her favorite one...
We'll have to tell her to watch this video because we mentioned her.
The Measure is the one that she said she absolutely loved. So
Is it a novel or like a...
It's yeah, and I think she said it has something to do with, like, one day everyone gets a box and it has a piece of string in it or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't remember what it was. And it tells you how...
Oh, wait, I think I remember her talking about... Okay.
But yeah, she said that's one of the best books she's ever read.
Small wooden box. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that one is definitely on my list because if it comes from her...
I'll tell you. This is what the, no spoilers or anything. 8 ordinary people, 1 extraordinary choice. It seems like any other day. You wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and head out. But today, when you open your front door, waiting for you is a small wooden box. The box holds your fate inside, the answer to the exact number of years you will live. Ha! All right. Yeah. Well, it's on my want to read now.
A couple classics here I did. Ragtime, which, if you know the musical at all, I love the musical. It's on... Is it coming back to Broadway, or did I make that up? Maybe I made that up. But anyway, Il Doctoro, cannot believe how poignant this is even today. It obviously goes into a lot of history. Some of it is fake, some of it's real, some of it's, Actual people, Harry Houdini and stuff like that. And then there are some the characters too. But so it sort of weaves history. It's like what is that called? Historical fiction.
Yeah. I might read this early this year because I've been wanting to. It's not super long either.
Yeah, but I cannot believe how much applies to our world today from this book.
Oh, I just am thinking of the songs too.
Yeah, I know. So
good. I might add that to my list.
And then I also read The Great Gatsby again. 3rd time I've read it. I swear, every time I read that book, I don't remember it at all. Every time I read it, I'm like, did I read this before? I don't remember this scene. I don't remember. And it is very, very different every time I read it. Read it the first time in high school.
Fascinating.
Hated it. I don't even know if I got through it.
I loved it.
Read it again when I was probably in my early 20s, and I remember liking it more. But then this time I'm like, I don't think I've ever even read this book.
What'd you think of it this time?
It was alright.
It was my favorite for a very long time, and I've read it a few times. I definitely, with adult eyes now and having read more, I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that's what
the storyline is not as strong, I feel like, as I always thought it was, but it was the book that introduced me to so many, like, themes in books, and, I mean, it was literally when you studied in high school and read, so. But it definitely made me like to read, and I think that's pretty important, so it will always hold a special
place. When I always think of, like, it's all building blocks, you know what I mean? Like, at the time, this was an amazing novel, and if you sort of view it in the context of when it came out, it's an amazing novel. It still is good. But then you look at, what other writers have done since then. Like, oh, there's so many, like, newer, better books. And I always say that about, like, high school reading lists. I'm like, these books are great, but there's better books that have come out since then because newer writers or, our generation of writers in the last, whatever. What can I think of? Newer writers.
I got lost, honestly.
Have then taken these kind of books and then built on them and made them even better. You know what I mean? We have even better books. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Better, butter, bigger, better.
This one falls under the category of I had really high hopes for it, and it very, very much let me down. I have no clue what happened in this book.
I can tell you. I remember very specific scenes when I read this
There's a few specific scenes, but there were certain things that, like, I literally am reading this book, I'm like, how did we get here? Like, how did we get to this point? And then, like,
I mean, it's for a young adult. I know, but junior.
I swear there's, like, chapters that are missing or something, because I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. And then the characters, like, it was unbelievable. Like, I couldn't follow.
You didn't say what it
happening.
is. Kingdom Keepers, Disney After Dark.
It's
a whole series.
So they made, so this guy, Ridley Pearson, wrote these books, and they are set in the Disney parks.
Very fun.
But over the years, things have changed in the park, so he came out with a new set of these novels that have updated attractions and updated, because things, that he talked about then maybe don't exist anymore or whatever. So he's got, like, new ones coming out. And I think this is the original one, if I remember right. But yeah, I genuinely, I read this one and I started to read the second one, and I'm like, I have no idea what's going on.
The only thing I remember is, and you tell me if I'm remembering right, because it was like 10 years ago that I read it. Like, they were in It's a Small World, and they, like, went back behind the characters, and, like, a villain was there.
And I think the dolls came to life, I think.
Yeah. Listen, I was really into it. I have to say, though, if you're a Disney World nerd, I think you'd like them just for fun, because they, you're going into all these attractions. But yeah, it's definitely, it's written for.
I kind of figured that once maybe Genevieve gets to be 10, she and I could maybe read them together. Because I have the first two, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to stop here. When she gets to be older, she'll probably want to read them, and then we can read them together, and I'll pick them back up at that point. But basically, the whole concept is there are, my brain is not working today, holograms. They're holograms, but they, like, go to bed in their own beds, and then they wake up as holograms in the parks at night. But then they can also, like,
move around.
Yeah, and they can actually get hurt. I don't know. It was a whole thing. I really wanted to like that series.
Yeah.
And I didn't.
My next one is another novel. I did a few novels in a row. Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. A lot of people I know love this book. I have to say, I think I rated it a little too low on my Goodreads. I rated it 3. I think I would lean closer to 4 now, having read some more. This book is a very familiar format too. Like, if you've read a lot of novels, it's going to seem really similar. I mean, I think that would be true for a lot of these books. However, I thought the characters were interesting enough. It was like someone that they knew each other all growing up, but then she moved away to college and, like, came back for the summer. Or, like, they'd always see each other in the summer. They, like, loved each other, but it, like, never worked out, and this, that, and the other. So, again, very familiar format, but I still liked it. I would recommend it if you're just needing, like, a fun beach read. I liked it.
Yeah. What was it called?
Romantic. I don't know that you would like it.
No, but what was
Every
it called?
Summer After
Every
by
Summer After.
Carly Fortune. I would read something else by the author.
Yeah?
Yeah. But again, just for, like, a fun beachy read. But you don't even have to be at the beach.
This book is a beast.
Were you miserable reading it?
Les Miserables.
Victor Hugo.
But you know what, though? I was surprised at how readable this was. It was actually... Because, a lot of times I feel like when you look at these giant old books, you're like, oh, I'm not even going to be able to understand it. It was very readable. And again, the human aspect of it, the human side of it, all the emotions are exactly how we feel today. And that's one of the most amazing things about older books to me. This was 1880, I want to say something like that. Maybe 1840, I can't remember now. And all the emotions these characters are going through are just exactly the kind of things we feel today. I'm like, it's all just the human experience. You know what I mean? We all still are humans, even though, time has passed.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful.
That's a pretty strong takeaway from this book.
It took me a full month to get through it. It was a long book.
We recently saw the tour of this, and we both love this musical. Like, it was the one for me that got me into musicals. I did not realize, which is crazy because I know this music. I genuinely did not realize until recently. I thought it was the French Revolution, like a part of that. No. It was like this small, one-off, random, one-night battle. They all well, I don't want to ruin it for you. But anyway, I genuinely thought it was like part of the French. No, it was just like this random little...
it was a rebellion, I think in, I don't know, 1830s,
that
1820s,
blew
something
my
like
mind.
that. But the one thing I will say is there's a whole section, I don't know where it is, but we're going to say it's about yay big, all about the Battle of Waterloo. You can just skip right over that. You don't need any. The only thing that happens is, like, at the very end, and now I remember one of the characters... I wonder if they
cut that out in the abridged version.
Maybe, but one of the characters had like, their father was in... Actually, I already forget which character it is, but, like, the very last couple paragraphs you learn, like, something that happened to one of the characters, and you're like, oh, okay, that's important. But all the other Battle of Waterloo stuff, you can just skip right over that.
That's funny.
Talk about different battalions in different areas, and it's a whole thing.
You gotta be into, like, battle-type war books,
Yeah.
probably. All right, my next one was Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. I really like her writing style. She writes the way she talks, even though she is very intelligent and has a lot of knowledge, and I'm assuming I think she's, PhD. Very intelligent woman, but writes the way she speaks, and I absolutely love that. And if you've ever, you could YouTube Brene Brown, and there's so many talks she's given. I'm betting she has a podcast. I should look into that. Anyway, any book I read of hers, I generally really like, but I don't always remember a lot from it. So I feel like they're the kinds of books that are really great to read when you need that kind of pep talk.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Because you're not necessarily always going to take something away from it for life. You might. There are a few things from her generally that I do. But I feel like it's hard to remember it all, but it's always nice to read. And for like the few weeks after, I feel uplifted.
Yeah.
I remember liking that book.
I've never read any of her books. I've seen some of her speeches though, and they're always really good. But one of the things I love about her from the little bit that I've seen is she's always like, I give these life talk, these life advice kind of things all the time, and I don't follow my own advice all the time.
Yeah,
she's like,
she gives a lot
she's a very
of,
human person, whereas I feel some, motivational speakers try to seem like holier than thou or whatever. I don't know, but she's very...
She does the opposite, and it's what makes it, I think that's why she's been so successful.
I think so too, yeah. This was one of my top tier books of the year. Definitely top 5. What Happened to You by Oprah Winfrey and Bruce D. Perry. This was so powerful, and it changed the way I look at stuff. We talked about this earlier in the year, too, in another video. But especially given what we do, we get a lot of negative comments about stuff. We get a lot of negativity. It's almost always positive, but we still, just because of what we do, we get negativity coming at us. And it changed the question in my mind from basically, it was... why are you the way you are?
Takes the spotlight off of us and more on like, okay, something's going on with that person.
What made you say that? Exactly, yeah. So what happened to you? And that, it just sort of reframes that comment. And like, okay, so maybe I get a comment about how I'm a bad parent, but then I'm like, okay, well, maybe that person has some trauma they need to work through, and they're just, reflecting that onto me. Anyway, it just sort of changed the whole question in my mind, and now every time we get a negative comment, it doesn't bother me as much, because I'm like, that has more to do with that person than me. And it's just, that just goes for everyone in life. Obviously, this is a comment on YouTube, but everybody has negativity in their life.
Yeah, that's one that's high on my list to read.
It was great. But yeah, so it's called What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. Yeah, it was absolutely fantastic. Okay, another one I read is sort of in the same vein as
I read this one too,
I cannot, again, this is one I had low expectations for and loved, The Hotel Nantucket. I cannot believe how much I liked this book.
I think you liked it more than I did. I liked it too, but when I compare that to the Newport one was mediocre.
You like that one better? But this one had, so the whole, A, I love Nantucket, but B, it had this hotel, and it had the people that lived there, and it had some people that came into town. It had like this, it had social media aspects, it had foodie aspects, it had ghosts. It was all over the map, and I
romance
loved it.
It was a good book. Okay, now that I'm thinking through some parts of the storyline, it was pretty good. I probably gave it 4 stars.
Like there was like a sort of an Anthony Bourdain kind of character.
Yeah,
there was like, I don't know. I absolutely love this book. It
made me so happy. It all. You're right.
And one of my agents, Cheyenne, actually I think ended up doing this with her reading group, and they ended up, everyone in that group loved it too. So
yeah, it's a goodie.
I loved that one. If you're looking for a novel, that's one that I recommend.
I also, I did the audiobook of Spare by Prince Harry.
Ooh, that's on my list, yeah.
Some parts of it I felt were kind of dragged on and on, but as a general rule, it was definitely interesting. I'm trying to keep in mind that it's his perspective. There are other perspectives. You're only hearing his side, so I'm trying to be better about that, because you hear it and you're like, oh my gosh, then these people are awful. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not, but this is his experience, right? And his perspective. But it was definitely, all of the current drama type things aside, it was fascinating to hear his perspective on his mom, Princess Di. That was the most interesting part, and how he really did not work through like most of that trauma until very recently. And it's sad, it's haunting, but it's also fascinating to read how the news was broken in, like all of that. Like that was the most interesting part to read about. And things he's done recently to help get over it also fascinating. That would be why you would like this book.
Yeah, that's definitely on my list.
And it was cool to hear him read it, of course. And there's also just some like funny stories he tells about just different travels he's done. Like at one point he went to, I want to say Antarctica, and he got frostbite somewhere, and it's just funny.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited to read that one. Okay. Nick Offerman, Where the Deer and the Antelope Play, the pastoral observations of one ignorant American who loves to walk outside. When I read this book, I picked it up specifically because I was in the mood to hike.
Oh my gosh,
I wanted so badly. Like, I kept saying, I'm like, I've got to go out. And I went like...
I literally was like, are you okay? You like talked about it a weird amount. I've got to get outside.
Desperate to go outside and go hiking.
Yeah.
And so I did it. I didn't do it near as much as I wanted to.
Well,
but
you still can't.
I know. But it was... This book was great, but it ended up not being what I thought it was going to be about. It's a lot of politics, which was fine, and a lot of the stuff was, politically, stuff that I probably agree with a lot of it, but it wasn't what I wanted when I picked up this book. I thought it was going to be more about just nature and being out in, in the pastoral areas of the American outside. And it was to some extent, but I would say that was probably only the first little bit of it, and then it was... Anyway, so I liked it. It just wasn't what I thought it was going to be when I picked it up. Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, was one that I really liked by Anderson Cooper.
That doesn't look as long as I thought it was. Why did I think it was so long?
You're probably thinking of The First Tycoon.
Ah, okay.
Because that's a bigger book, one that I haven't picked up because I keep thinking I'm going to, fascinating. All about the Vanderbilt family and the Astors and old New York and building the breakers in Newport, Rhode Island, and his whole family story. And it was pretty fascinating. There's so much in that family, especially when you're looking at uncles and that kind of stuff, and the Titanic is involved, and so there was just so much. If you find New York and sort of the old world turn of the century,
I bet you if you're into the show Gilded Age, you'd probably like it. Probably. We're going to start that show soon, and I can't wait.
It's very much just that. It's got the history aspect of it, but it's just this family's. There's so much that has happened in the last couple hundred years with this family.
Gosh. Yeah, that's one I might read. Next book, a novel called Remarkably Bright Creatures. I liked it. It is very highly rated. I don't know that I would rate it as highly as it. Like, it's got a 4.4 stars, 400,000 ratings. It was a cute book, and I didn't regret reading it, but I don't know that I would be like, anyone needs to read this book. It just, I don't know what it was, why it fell short of the mark for me, but a lot of people seem to love it. I mean, maybe you would. It's about, let me make sure I'm remembering. Right? Kind of. Parts of it were very interesting. Like, there's this woman who is working at, like, nights at this museum thing, and then there's this, she's been, like, had this missing son for decades, and it kind of follows that storyline. It's interesting, but some parts of it I was like, I don't know. Like, with the octopus, I was like, And I'm all about being able to suspend disbelief, but just parts of it were just kind of eye-rolly to me, and I don't know. I'm usually not that person, but for whatever reason, this book, I just couldn't get past some parts of it.
That's
but it was a cute story.
Yeah. Okay, two quick novels here. People We Meet on Vacation, didn't like it. Didn't like it at all.
People love that, and it's literally like kind of our job. It's like a social media... She's like a travel influencer, social media, whatever. Yeah. We should have liked that book, and neither of us did.
I just think it was...
It was okay.
I am not the audience for that book.
No.
But B, from the first 10 pages, I'm like, well, I know exactly where this book is going, and I was exactly... there was no twist at any point. Yeah. Anyway, it wasn't for me. The Kite Runner, I'm not going to talk too long about this because it's been out for a million years. I really liked it. I do think it was a little long. And I found myself getting kind of bored with it. I did enjoy it, though, but there were just times when I'm like, I kept waiting. I think it could have been edited down a little bit more, but it's been around forever. But I really liked it. I just found myself getting a little bored.
Okay.
This one, very small audience, called Understanding Exposure. It's literally all about taking great photographs. I learned so much about photography, and I swear I have done this research so many times, and I'm not a great photographer by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel like I finally, after reading this book, I'm like, okay, I'm beginning to understand the basics of it. So if you're into photography or you want to get into photography, Understanding Exposure, I think, is probably a great place to start. I at least have, I feel like, a base knowledge of photography and how it works now.
And you just kind of read a page or two a night.
Right,
Which was really smart, because a book like that, it's like, you're not just going to sit and be riveted by it. But to read a few pages, I feel like is digestible.
Exactly. And there's
then
a lot of
you go to sleep
times...
and you remember it, because that's what science says, right?
Yeah. And there's a lot of times where, I mean, usually my whole thing is I'm doing video, but I'm like, well, I'm going to go ahead and take photos while I'm here too. But if I get one or the other, I always get video. But if I also take photos, sometimes I'll get it and it's on auto mode. I'm like, this is a great photo. And then other times I'm like, it's terrible and I don't know why. Now I can at least figure out, okay, this is probably why this is overblown. This is probably why, and I can sort of correct if I have the time.
Yeah.
And, but if you're doing, like, portrait photography where it's a very controlled environment, you have, one subject and you're kind of moving around, you know what I mean, versus what I do, which is travel photography, which means I'm in vastly different things constantly, you know what I mean? So, anyway, I have a basic knowledge of them, like, okay, now I at least know why that photo turned out well and that one didn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, we can both talk about this one together. Green lights. Okay, perfect. That was next on mine. Green light. if you've heard the audiobook, Green light. That was good. Yours is good. Matthew McConaughey.
My expectations could not have been lower.
Could not have been lower.
I rated this 5 stars.
I might have too. People feel a way about Matthew McConaughey, which blew my mind. I don't think I've seen him in anything other than How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Failure to Launch.
I don't know anything about him. I just know that sometimes when I hear him talk, his voice annoys me. I'm sorry, Matthew McConaughey. I know you're watching. No, I'm kidding.
It was so good.
It was, and parts of it, but I found it really fascinating.
I didn't find any part of it.
I have since watched, he's very spiritual, but in his own very distinct way. And some parts of it were kind of weird, but you kind of learn that that's just the way he is, which makes it just a little bit more fascinating. But just some of his story in his life was so...
When he was a foreign exchange student in Australia,
hilarious.
That was great. His family life was fascinating too,
yes.
like his relationship with his parents.
There, at no point is this book boring. I will tell you that. There is no point in this book that's boring. You get a lot of his life, and there's funny stories too, but then there's also like really meaningful things, some really good pieces of advice just for life.
Yeah, very good.
Take some with a grain of salt. But
bumper sticker.
You have to listen to the audio. If you're going to do it, listen to the audio.
But the book itself is also fascinating because it's laid out in such a way that it almost looks like there's post-it notes in some places, and like it's not just a read through. I loved it.
It might have been one of my favorite audiobooks we've ever done. Yeah. Just because I grew to not be annoyed by his voice. Go figure.
Gosh,
I would listen to it again.
Couldn't believe how much I loved that book.
Our friends, Ben and Emily, were both like, they loved it. And we were like, really?
Yeah.
Matthew McConaughey? And they're like, we know, but it's so good. And they were right.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay. You go ahead. Do a few.
Okay. Homework by Julie Andrews. She wrote another one before this. It was called Home.
Yeah, and then this was more her like working life.
Something I don't remember what the first one was called. I never read it, but this is the second one. It's all about her life in Hollywood and that kind of stuff. I loved this. You didn't like it so much. I quit halfway through. It was interesting through the Mary Poppins and Sound of Music. Did you know that she filmed Mary Poppins first, filmed Sound of Music, then Mary Poppins came out? So she was not a household name, and by the time she had already filmed her 2 most famous things. It was wild.
She'd already done them.
Yeah.
I'm like, that blew my mind. So those parts, I was absolutely riveted, and we were listening to her read it.
Half,
yeah, and then it got into other stuff, and I just haven't seen enough, and I don't know.
Her other movies, like Victor Victoria, and I mean, she did so much.
I guess I could pick it up. Maybe I could pick it up and finish reading it just because
and
I did get half of it. It
talks a lot about her children and raising children, and they bought a vacation home or a second home in Gstaad, and her going back and forth and that kind of stuff, and different marriages that she went through, and I don't know. I really liked it, but I just love Julie Andrews. I mean,
she is a pretty lovable.
She's an international treasure.
She is. All right. One of the most popular books that was so recommended, and still is, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I am not into like video games. I still found it interesting. So I don't think you have to be into video games and stuff to like it. It was so long for what it was. That book could have been half. I think I would have genuinely liked it if it was half the length that it was. Because it went on and on. I think that's why, like, over the nights of reading it, I started to like it less and less, because I'm like, okay, let's move this story along. But it was interesting. There was a wild curveball towards the end that I'm like, you literally like, what? But it was like a sad. I mean, I'm not laughing at the story, but it was just so truly out of left field that it was confusing. And so that was, I think, a big reason why I I don't know.
Yeah.
I felt like the book could have been half the length, and it would have been very good, but I definitely knocked it down a bit just because it went on too long, and the curveball really did not compute.
Yeah. Some of our friends said kind of a similar thing. It's that towards the end there was a curveball in that.
And it's just like, what?
Yeah. That was Jimmy Fallon's first book club book.
Huh. Interesting.
This is one by Frances Mays. I really, really, really wanted to like this book, and I didn't. And so Frances Mays is the one who wrote Under the Tuscan Sun, and it's a year in the world, but it's also not a year in the world because it's, I guess, these are from different travels that she's gone to all these different places, but it was over the course of several years, and so I don't know why she called it a year in the world. I mean, but it's all these different places that she traveled.
It's catchier. Little Zane.
And I wanted to like it so much, and I wrote down. Now I gotta find it really fast, but I wrote down why I didn't like it. I don't remember all the details now, but I just, for whatever reason, I kept thinking, I've been wanting to read this for so long. Okay, so here's what I wrote. I said, I really wanted to like this book. By all accounts, I should have loved it, but I didn't. I kept reading it and thinking, why don't I like this? It has travel, food, and even some gardening. And this is what I said. I think I finally figured it out. She's too hoity-toity. She writes like a college professor, not a writer. And I think that's the difference. But see, I don't even hardly remember it now. When it came to the food, she was far too detailed in the preparation and ingredients for a travel book. I love food writing, but this to me was more about food than the travel aspect. Like I've always said, I always feel like food is a big part of travel, but I think we've entered this world now where food is the only reason people travel. And it's the only thing people do. I think that's a big part of it, but there's also so much more.
Yeah, but it depends on what you're into.
Right, but I'm saying, right, and I think now we've entered this world where we're missing so much culture and art and architecture and history. Well, we're the geeks
that like the history tours.
Right, but
I'll choose that any day.
I think, you look at...
after we eat.
I think you look at old school, travel kind of stuff, and it was a lot more about the culture and the art and the history and food. Now it's food.
Well, I mean, you got the Travel Channel that just does food.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I love Bourdain. I love Phil Rosenthal with all of my heart. But I think because of that, so much of the cultural stuff gets missed a lot of times when it comes to travel.
All right. Troublemaker by Leah Remini. Woof. We both read. I made you read. No, we listened to.
Yes, we were on a road trip.
We made someone else read.
We were on a...
Yeah. We flew through that.
Yeah.
It's not a wildly long, I don't think, book. Wild to learn about Scientology. Because you hear about it, you don't really fully, but like hearing the ins and outs of like, you just have to read it. I think this would be fascinating to literally anyone.
Yeah.
Literally anyone. Absolutely fascinating. And then it just gets wild, as she started to try to break away, what that looked like. And so I just think it's one of those books that anyone would find fascinating. Everyone would.
Made me hate Tom Cruise, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Wasn't a huge fan to begin with.
But yeah, she definitely spills some tea on Tom Cruise and some of the higher-ups in Scientology. And it is... And like times she went to Tom Cruise's house for dinner party and just weird stuff that happened.
Yeah.
I would read it just for that, but it's all wild.
And her trying to get out and her trying to... Yeah, that
Woo!
was... Yeah.
And I don't even care about Leah Remini. Like, I liked the show.
Yeah.
King of Queens. But, I mean... and also her and Saved by the Bell.
Obviously, her and Saved by the Bell. I read 2 books by this up-and-coming guy. A Midsummer Night's Dream and Hamlet by a young guy named Bill Shakespeare. I think he's got a big future ahead of him.
One day. Some people say he himself didn't actually write it. Did we ever tell you guys? Yeah. So when we were in New York over the summer, we went and saw, oh my gosh, what my dream. We saw Shakespeare in the Park. Mm-hmm. It was Hamlet, my favorite Shakespearean play. I cried beginning to end. I think I cried so much. It was truly like a little Jessie dream. Well, right outside of it, there's people that like had flyers, and I'm taking one like an idiot. And it was like all about like scan this QR code and it'll tell you about who really wrote Shakespeare's plays. And I'm like, I love that people feel so strongly about it that they are there to let you know. I'm like, William Shakespeare's not getting any money from any of this. Like, what does it matter?
Yeah, I did find that
But I love that people are so, like, into it. I'm like, oh, it's fascinating. I haven't really looked deeply into it. But my point is, it just made us giggle.
That's something I feel like we've always heard, like, oh, maybe he didn't write them all, whatever.
Oh, yeah. And there's a lot of, like, information out there.
But it's fascinating.
Like, it was 500 years ago.
People spent, and they're doing this show every day. So is that guy out there, like, eight shows a week? just to make sure everyone knows that
He
Bill Shakespeare
needs-
maybe didn't write this.
He's gotta right the wrong, baby. All right, now we got coffee brewing. All right, for you, I'm good. Where are we? We had to stop because the camera overheated.
Okay.
Can't imagine.
You want me to go?
Yeah.
This is going to hurt. Apparently there's a TV show. I didn't know
Oh,
about
that
this.
was my next one. Perfect.
Okay, so we can talk about it together.
Yeah. Sorry.
I don't think any other book this year made me laugh as hard or cry as hard. This was an amazing book.
It's about a doctor who I think eventually left the field because it was so.
And now
so
he's a
it's
writer,
sad because
for
it's
TV
sad
shows.
because it talks about he's in the UK, right, and how difficult it is to be a doctor, especially like he was an OBGYN. Anyway, some of the stories are not for the faint of heart.
Yes.
So just be aware of that.
And it's not Adam McKay.
No,
It's
different.
Adam
K.
K.
Different person. But yeah, we listened to the audiobook and it was just so fascinating to hear some of the things he's seen and stories he has to tell.
But he
very
does
sad things too.
So I read another book, and actually I just finished this one, and it's kind of a similar one, but very different.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
So this is a very famous book, but it's called When Breath Becomes Air. It's also about a doctor, but he finds out he has a terminal illness. So this is much more heartbreaking in a lot of ways, but it's very similar in the fact that they're both sort of doctors. I think he was a nurse, actually, wasn't he? But he was working towards becoming a doctor. Maybe he was an OBGYN.
No, he was an OBGYN.
OBGYN, okay.
He goes through what it was like going through all those
but
stages, though.
It's almost like ER versus Scrubs.
Yeah,
It's like they're both about hospital settings, and if you are a doctor, if you work in that field, or even as somebody who's not, I found them both utterly fascinating. This one's completely heartbreaking. This one was so funny, and then eventually, but you know what? I feel like every profession says this, but nurses and doctors, because they've gone through so much, nothing phases them, and so they have to have a sort of a sense of humor about their jobs.
Because otherwise, it
exactly.
becomes too
And so
much
I feel like this is probably what more hospital settings are like, because nurses don't have an edit button, and so
he's not a nurse though. He's a doctor.
no, I'm saying nurses and doctors don't.
Yes,
people in the medical field don't have an edit button because they have to. They've seen everything, they've done everything, and so.
I don't think they're easy to make blush.
That's maybe what I'm trying to get to, yeah.
Yeah.
But I always remember people talking about how, like, Scrubs was more what it was actually like to work in a hospital than any of those shows like ER or anything like that.
I mean, beyond the obvious things that Scrubs can be.
But anyway, I really liked both of these books. They're very similar and very different. Okay, so I read several books about New York because we went to New York in July, and I'm only going to talk about one of them. New York by Edward Rutherford. It's all about Manhattan, and basically it's in the style of James Michener, where basically it is a epic novel that goes through the history of a certain place. He's got Hawaii and Texas and Alaska.
But does it
and all
have
that.
characters?
It has characters, so it's a novel, but it's all actual history and that kind of stuff that goes through it. And so it sort of follows one family's through line all the way through, from the early settlings when it was a Dutch settlement all the way through, modern day Manhattan.
We watched some good documentaries before. We'd been to New York before, but just this past trip, we were like, let's watch some history of New York City itself and like the settlement of it, and it was fascinating.
But then you actually get to New York, and you're like, okay, so this whole area, where Wall Street and that kind of stuff is at the south, or at the bottom of the island, you're like, okay, well, this is where it all started, and this is where, and you can see how it's been built onto, and then you realize why certain things are called certain things, and it's fascinating. I really, really liked it. So if you're going to go visit New York City, or if you live there, you would probably find this very fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, next novel I read was The Second Mrs. Astor by Shauna Abe. She, if you're into Titanic, yes, read it. If you are into the Astors, yes, read it. If you're watching Gilded Age, read it. It is about the Mrs. Astor, or she married, oh boy, which one of them? I don't know.
Jacob?
She was the one that died on the Titanic.
Was that Jacob?
I think so. I never remember, because there's like John Jacob Astor, there's Jacob Jingleheimer. I rated it only 3 stars because I don't think it was like the best book ever. But like I said, if you fit any of those categories I just named, you would really like it. But it was about her and like meeting him and falling in love. He was a lot older than her, and then they were on the Titanic. So it goes into that, and that was fascinating. She survived. And she was also, I'm pretty sure, pregnant at the time. It's very interesting. So I don't think it's like the best book I've ever read, but some people will.
And it's written like a novel, right?
Yeah, yes, 100%. Okay. So again, it's historical fiction because obviously they had to fill in some gaps, but it feels like you're really hearing the story of that.
So cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to show you here. We went to Egypt, and I really went down a rabbit hole. Like we learned about it like 3 months before we actually went. And so I was like, I have 3 months to become a scholar on all things. I have to become an Egyptologist. Right. So this is the stack of books that I read before we left. I read all of these except one, cover to cover.
Y'all, he really did.
So this is the stack of books I read about Egypt. So I became an amateur Egyptologist over the course of a couple months. I'm not going to talk about all these. I'm only going to talk about a couple. The first one, hold on one second. If you find Egypt fascinating, some of them go, ugh. Okay.
You better rapid fire these.
I will. So this is called Palace Walk. It's actually part of a trilogy. This is the first part of a trilogy by Naguib Mahfouz, who actually lived in Cairo, and he is an actual, so this is a novel, and I think he won the Pulitzer, and so fascinating. The only thing I didn't like about this book, so when you walk around, there's all kinds of stuff named after him. He's like Cairo's favorite son kind of thing. We went to a restaurant while we were there called Restaurant Naguib Mahfouz. It was a beautiful book. The only thing I didn't like about it is I wanted him to talk more about Cairo itself. It follows this family kind of in a similar way to the other one, but it talks a lot about the family and their family life, and you gain a lot of cultural insight about that family in a broader sense. But I wanted to learn more about the streets of Cairo and all that kind of stuff. But this is a beautiful, beautiful book, and like I said, it's part of a trilogy. This one, if you are a fan of Downton Abbey, is all about the Earl of Grantham and how he and Howard Carter ended up finding King Tut's tomb. This one was a lot more about the actual Earl and Downton Abbey or Highclere Castle than it was about Egypt, but it was still fascinating. So if you have interest in both,
it's called The Earl and the Pharaoh.
Yes, The Earl and the Pharaoh. But I was hoping more, because we were about to go to Egypt, more about Egypt. It really was a lot about their family and all that. Actually, I'll skip that one. This is my favorite book I read about Egypt. Of all that entire stack, this was my favorite one. And it was one I was reading while we were actually there. It's called The Empress of the Nile by Lynn Olson. And it's about this woman who basically, not single-handedly, but spearheaded the efforts to save so many ancient monuments. But she also had so much to do in World War II, and she worked at the Louvre, and there's so many interwoven aspects of this. She had an absolutely fascinating life, and she was a woman doing this in that time period. And she was basically there, like Abu Simbel in the south of Egypt. These huge monuments and temples would have been lost when they built the Aswan Dam, and they're
well, we got to see some of it. Abu Simbel was one of them, and you flew over there, and you get to get out and see it, and that would be gone. And it is huge, so impressive. So I can't imagine that being just underneath water.
It's amazing. Gosh. So I absolutely loved this book. And then the last one here is called Mirage. It's all about when Napoleon and his cohorts got to Egypt. I think 1792, I think, is when they got there. Fascinating book. But when you actually go, you learn so much of. This was sort of the big thing that sort of set off a rebirth of people being interested in Egypt in Europe and all that kind of stuff, for better and for worse. And so this was basically the rebirth of modern Egyptology, and it was fascinating. But you can see here, even on the cover, that's the Sphinx there and the pyramids. It was almost completely covered by sand at the time. So a lot of these things they're seeing when they're there, it was a huge group of soldiers, but it was also a huge group of scientists and intellectuals and that kind of stuff. But they did a lot of bad and a lot of good. Anyways, fascinating. Huh. So those are my favorite ones that I read about Egypt. And then I only have a couple left. So
wow, I've got a few. All right. Subtle Art of Not Giving a... No. Hated it. Hated them. Don't even mind the curse word, whatever. I thought I would get... That book was the dumbest book. Yeah, I love self-help books. That one, absolutely not. I understand some of his mentality, and it wasn't that I disagreed, but it would just... I don't know. It just was not as good. I think it's got that shock value of the title, so it became, popular. It's not great.
It should have been a pamphlet, I think.
Could have been a pamphlet. Could have been a blog post.
one of the only ones I think I've ever rated 1 star. It was like, anyway.
I think I gave it 2.
Speaking of which, another one that I rated 1 star, this is the worst book I read this year, called Better Small Talk. Oh. It would have been better titled, How to Be a Human Being for People from Outer Space. Because it was unbelievable, like some of the stuff. So we were talking about how we have, I hate small talk and that kind of stuff. I want to have deeper conversations. Mm-hmm. And so I picked up this book, and it really, it's like the most basic how to, like, it's like, walk into the room and look at someone in the eye. Like,
oh wow,
unbelievable!
It really is.
If you are
how to talk for aliens.
Yeah, if you are an extreme introvert, or if you are from Mars, you might find some interesting stuff in here. But it was just the most basic.
And I like the idea of like reading a book on how to like be better at that initial, better small talk, if you will, or whatever. That I'd be into. But I was excited to read it once I saw the title, and then
it was things like. Try to find something you have in common. That's something you can talk about. And I'm like...
Well, yeah, but how do you get to the point where you know what we have in common?
Yeah. Okay, the camera keeps overheating, so we're going to blast through this pretty quick. Okay, so I'll go through a couple here. Origins of a Journey. Jessica's brother, Michael, got this for me. And it's just little entries about different explorers and different things that they did. And what I really liked about it was I flagged some of them and was like, okay, this is somebody I want to look into more. So each one is only a couple paragraphs. I mean, each one is like 1 page maybe.
Yeah. But I even read a few. You had that in the bathroom.
History's greatest adventures marked by ambition, necessity, and madness. And so it was great. And there's a lot of people now that I'm like, okay, I want to look more into this person. So.
But again, I'm serious. It's a good bathroom read because it's literally short. I'm just saying.
And then The Bridges of Madison County. Obviously, this has been out for a million years. There's a movie too. I still haven't seen the movie. But I picked this up because, like I said, I was looking for something really short. But I actually really ended up liking this too. I told Jessica.
There's a musical now.
Yes.
It's hardly new now.
Jason Robert Brown, my main guy. And there's a couple songs from that I really like. Anyway, we won't go to that. I told Jessica, I'm like, I feel like this is almost like if she and I had, for whatever reason, not met and then met now. Like, this is sort of what our story would be. Like, it's just like a lost love that, like, you meet somebody and you're like, I was supposed to be with you and something didn't happen.
Gosh, that would be really... Why am I about to cry? That would be so sad.
But then, like, okay, like, something went wrong and we were supposed to be together. Anyway, it was really good.
Wow. Boy, that got me fast.
Easy, lady.
All right, pull it together. All right, let's talk about Court of Thorns and Roses. I'm going to cover 4 books here. I read the first, second, and third. And then I also read the, like, little number 3.5. It's like a little Christmas holiday. It's not really Christmas. It's like a holiday winter story. That one I rated the lowest. But 1 through 3, 1 was pretty good. But I was like, I don't get it. Like, people are just loving this ACOTAR.
Huge right now,
the
right?
Court of Thorns. Yes. Series. But 1 didn't do... It was good. But 2 and 3, I'm like, okay, I get it. Totally changes. When you get to book 2... Shocking. Like, I think book 2 was my favorite because you're just like, wait, what? You can't do that. But in book 1, this. It was so good. So if you read it, you can't just do that. There's a lot of paperwork. Read book 1. You'll be like, okay, like, I get it. Read book 2. You'll be sold. So I had to stop because they're longer books. And I was like, I was trying to meet my goal. So I want to this year pick it back up and finish the series because, yeah. So I definitely liked it. I get it. Not for the faint of heart. Not in a lot of ways. All right. 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. I read this because a friend, actually multiple friends of mine have told me to read this. So this was one of the best self-help books, if you will, I've ever read. It is not, as you would think, a productivity book. You'd think it would be. It's actually talking about how so much of our life is spent like trying to, here, it just says, time is our biggest worry. There's too little of it. The average human lifespan is absurdly, insultingly brief. Assuming you live to be 80, you have just over 4,000 weeks. We're obsessed with our lengthening to-do lists, our overfilled inboxes, work-life balance, distraction, and life hacks. But a lot of times those techniques often make things worse. It basically just goes into like, how do you embrace the fact that life is finite and still make meaning of your life and not only be focused on that to-do list that you're never going to reach the end of. You're just never gonna. And like, I remember one chapter so specifically because it's totally me where he was like, you will always try to find that, like, what's that one hack that's going to, like, you'll finally feel completely organized when it comes to literally, but also just, like, I've got to find a digital organization system that's going to work. And it's not to say that you shouldn't still pursue, you know, those kinds of things if they make you happy, but that you're never going to find that thing. Like, it just doesn't exist. There's a reason there's so many books on it. So, but it was a very deep, life-changing book. I feel like I should read it once a year just to remind me. You will read through it really quickly. You need to read that book.
I just added it to my list. That's what I was just doing.
Absolutely loved it. 5 stars. So I don't know where it cut off. We've now had to switch to our iPhone camera because that one was just done.
What, 3 times?
This video is like 100 years long.
3 times, 4 times?
So it's going to sound and look different. But that book, 5 stars, would recommend anyone.
Okay, so really quickly, I talk about these every year. I've read one every October so far. I love these books. I think that I'm meant to be a part of the Thursday Murder Club. I'm definitely supposed to have moved to England and live somewhere.
You should already be there. Yeah.
I need to live somewhere in the suburbs of London, and I just love these books. I just absolutely love them. Okay, I talk about them every year, so I'm not going to go into it. You're Lucky, You're Funny. How Life Becomes a Sitcom. I love Phil Rosenthal, one of my absolute favorites.
He's the creator. I feel like he's not a household name as much as...
Well, I was going to get into that.
Oh, go ahead.
He is the showrunner. He was the co-creator with Ray Romano of Everybody Loves Raymond, and I'm actually watching Everybody Loves Raymond right now. And so it's funny because he talks about all these different episodes and that kind of stuff. He also talks about his own life, and he's so funny. But he also, I found out about him because he's had a couple different travel TV shows now, and one of them is now on Netflix called Somebody Feed Phil, and it's one of my absolute favorite travel shows. But he is so funny, and I love his show so much.
He's such a lovable goofball.
Exactly, and he's, oh my gosh. So I absolutely loved this book. And it talks this was obviously before he got into the travel stuff, but it's all about the creation of Everybody Loves Raymond. And if you're a fan of that show, or if you, like as I am right now, rewatching these episodes, it's so funny because I remember as a kid watching it and liking it, but now we're at the age of, you know, Ray and Deborah, and we have kids almost the same ages. The conversations they have are like the same conversations we have, like right now. It's great.
Okay, The 7-Year Slip by Ashley Poston. That one was read, I think I read on our New York trip. It was really cute. It was definitely a unique book. It's where, like, this couple meets, and it kind of is, I'm going to say magical, but that sounds almost silly in this context, but it is, in this way, and it has to do with this beautiful apartment. It's all set in New York, which just made it really fun, because we were literally there. But so first of all, if you're into New York, maybe you live there, it's a fun read because it's just very specific about restaurants. Some of them real, some of them not, as far as I understand. But it's very specific about neighborhoods they're in and like vibes. And I'm like, I think if you lived in New York, you would just enjoy it for that alone. I'm assuming this writer lives there because she seems to know like a lot. But it's just a cute story. It's romantic. It's fun, and it's New Yorky. I think it's a fun read.
Yeah.
Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking Stress Cycle by Emily Nagoski. It's written by her and her sister Amelia. I think they might be twin sisters, Emily and Amelia. I don't think it's for everyone. It is very, very evidently written for a female perspective. Like, there is no doubt. I mean, a lot of the things they talk about, it is definitely geared towards women. I do think it's changed some of the way I think about stress and actually taking a break. Like this year, I'm taking it seriously that for my own physical health, because it talks about, I mean, it goes into the science of what stress does to your body. And I'm recognizing that, like, physical ailments in people I love and what stress and anxiety is doing into it. But on top of that, also just for my own mental health, taking it seriously that even though I have a job that I enjoy, it doesn't mean I don't need to take time completely away from it. Not filming, not editing, not, doing anything. So I think it's a worthwhile read for you if you feel like you get burnt out easily, which is probably everyone. And by easily, I mean if you just get burnt out, not even easily, just I think it'd be a worthwhile read.
I feel like that's something I always tell my agents too, is I'm like, burnout is so real. And it's so important to set time aside for yourself in the evenings, on the weekends, whenever you can find it. Because even if it's a job you love, it's almost easier to get burned out because you're like, well, I'll do it because I want to do it.
Yeah, it's not painful to do,
Right. You have to take time for yourself and
even it's almost like rewiring your brain. Like your brain needs a break from it.
Turn your email off. Turn your notifications off on your phone, especially now we're all so connected. That is one of the best things I've done. Is turn off notifications for email. And so now when I'm ready
I finally did it with certain hours. I don't, and I actually at no point can see the little number
Yeah.
So that way, if I'm checking my inbox, I have to intentionally go into it because when I would see the number, I'm like, well, I'll clear it real fast.
Exactly. Everyone does that.
But I turned off the number completely on it, so I never.
And even if you just pull it up, you're like, well, I'll just do that real fast. If you read the email, you're thinking about it. So even if you're not replying right away, we don't have to be this connected, guys. We just don't. And every job I've ever had, I've at some point experienced severe burnout. Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, you have to take steps to remedy it before you get to that point.
Yeah. Mine has never been more severe than with this job, though.
Really?
Like, teaching was really hard, and I would feel burnout, but you're forced to take breaks teaching.
Yeah.
No one's making me, so I just do it. 52 weeks a year. No
I'm
breaks.
burned out as a teacher, and I'm not even a teacher.
Yeah, honestly.
I could never.
That's a different level.
Jim Henson, the biography, loved this book. I talked about it a lot during Vlogmas, but it goes through his whole life again, obviously the biography.
Show the back.
But, yeah. Just all about his different movies and stuff. And now I really want to go back through and watch all these ones I've never seen, and then ones that I have maybe haven't seen since I was a little kid. So it was good. I liked it. It's a biography, obviously pretty easy to wrap your head around that. Mm-hmm. Read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and I got this very beautiful version of it. Mm-hmm. And there's some other ones. I started to read Great Expectations. It's one of only like 2 books that I just couldn't get through.
I read that, and we had to read it in 9th or 10th grade. I remember actually really liking it, so I'd be curious to read it again now.
Yeah, maybe, and this was a while ago I tried to read it, but Great Expectations and On the Road by Jack Kerouac are like the only 2 books I've ever just put down in the middle. I'm like, I couldn't get through it. But Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities and Great Expectations. I'd like to read at least one of those again, maybe, or one of those this year.
Okay, so How to Break Up with Your Phone, 30-Day Plan to Take Back Your Life by Catherine Price. I don't think this is the best book on this subject. However, I do think it has made a difference. This is a literal plan that you're supposed to do, and she breaks it down day by day. I think that's genius. But knowing what I do, and I'm literally making excuses, but it's just not possible. But there's a lot of good takeaways in it, and I guess that's my big thing is if I can apply a few of those things, I'll take it. And I already have turning off the number on my emails, and it has made, just that small thing, I can't believe how much it's affected. So I think it's a good read. It's a fast read, but I would be interested if you guys have any recommendations on unplugging from your phone type books. Let me know, because I don't think that's the best one that exists.
One thing I know you've done recently is just leaving your phone in the other room. Because a lot of times, I'll leave my phone upstairs in our bedroom, or I'll leave it, in the kitchen or whatever. But I know for a while, if we were watching TV or something, if we paused for a second so I could run to the restroom or something,
I would just grab my phone and scroll. Immediately. What don't you all?
I'll be gone for 60 seconds, and you had to pull up your phone.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, I'm just staring at the wall. But I've tried to grow more comfortable with staring at the wall.
Right. That's
because that's where you think about something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We talked about in Vlogmas about just being
at the post office.
Being in the post office. Being in the post office.
Yeah. Okay, The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. I've talked about it in a previous video. I don't think it's a very well-written memoir, and this is someone that reads a lot of memoirs. I've got yet another one to talk about in a minute. But it is by far the most fascinating, growing up as someone that loved Britney Spears and knowing what I thought I knew about Britney and then actually hearing what her experience was during that time is crazy. One big takeaway is she was in her prime of fame, and I knew this, but I really hadn't thought about it when she was 17, 18, 19, 20, and then it all starts falling apart. And so she was really only a few years of huge fame, and then the press just wouldn't leave her alone, and it just all. But I know a lot of us have already heard a lot of the stories with Justin Timberlake, so I think it's a fascinating read. Only book I think I've ever read in one night. So. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I feel like I don't need to read it because you told me everything.
You don't. I sat up the next day and was like, I got to tell you everything.
Just checking to make sure it was still recording because, again, a couple years ago we did this and we filmed so much. And then I got it to check and it wasn't filming. Okay.
No, I thought, but also there's the time we filmed on our phone and because we're using the back camera and it was facing the other way. So we were filming us talking, but you were just seeing the other side of the room.
So much. Okay. So Walt's Apprentice by Dick Nunes. It's all about this guy who basically started at Disneyland and then moved to Walt Disney World. He worked for the company for many, many decades. So many great stories about the parks and that kind of stuff. And amazingly, I had this book. My mom got it for Christmas last year. I finished this book the day he passed away, a couple days ago. Yeah. I literally had finished it, and then I pulled up the thing, and it was Dick Nunes, Disney legend, has passed away.
It's wild.
Wild. Anyway,
It's
great
written by him.
Yes.
Okay.
But there's so many great stories about Disneyland and Walt Disney World. So if you're a Disney theme park person, it's a fun read.
Finding Me by Viola Davis. Perhaps my favorite memoir I've ever read. Maybe at least top 3. I listened to the audiobook. I think anyone would be fascinated by it. Again, not for the faint of heart, some of the stuff she went through, but it makes it all the more powerful where she is now, and just hearing her viewpoint. And I feel like every memoir you talk about, you're like, I can't believe what they went through, but the way she tells her story is so beautiful, and hearing her tell the story, I have literally never seen Viola Davis in anything, and this book was riveting. You don't have to know anything about her. Now I want to see everything she's ever been in. But and then hearing how she ever even got into acting, and then what it's like now, it's so good. It's so good.
You talked a lot about that book.
I can't shut up about it.
No.
It's won, I know it won awards. It's a very popular memoir.
Yeah. Also, I don't think books should be for the faint of heart. You've said that a lot about a lot of books.
Well, but I guess what I'm trying to say is, it's if you're listening to the audiobook and there are kids in the car.
Yeah.
Anytime I say not for the faint of heart, not a book that you should listen to. And all of it for very different reasons.
Not a family audiobook. Yeah.
You know.
A History of the World in 6 Glasses. This was pretty fascinating. So it talks about beer, wine, tea, coffee, and soda. And it goes basically through ancient Egyptian times when they drank beer and all that kind of stuff, and how the history of the world has been shaped in so many ways by these 5 beverages. And so it was it was a pretty quick historical read, but I found it fascinating.
I might read this year.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it's amazing how interwoven what we drink between, trades between different countries and cultures that we, things that we still do now that date back thousands of years, and how the trade of these different drinks and teas and all that kind of stuff have basically shaped, in a lot of ways, our modern world.
The weirdest book I read this year, and the one that took me forever, and I don't know why, it was called Wellness by Nathan Hill. I don't even know how to describe it. I don't know how to rate it. I don't even think I rated it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to feel about it. It was interesting. Parts were a little more boring, but it follows this couple, and I won't spoil it. It follows this couple that met in the 90s, the grungy 90s in Chicago, and I liked that part, and how they had apartments that overlooked each other, and they would watch each other, but they didn't know the other person. It sounds creepy. It's cuter the way they present it, but anyway. And then it fast forwards to 25 years later, and they're married with an 8 or 9-year-old, and they're moving into this nicer place, and they've got different jobs, more corporate type jobs, and it's called Wellness because where the woman works, it's this placebo effect testing clinic, and that part's fascinating too. But this story goes all over the place at all times. At one point, it's talking about one of the characters and on Facebook, doing Facebook rants, and there's 40 pages about the Facebook algorithm.
Yeah.
But all of it was interesting, but it just was odd. But I will say, I just don't know how to feel about it. Yeah. I really don't. I think it was good.
Yeah. What's funny
it was just, the ending I thought was a little dumb. I feel like the editors were the publishers were like, you gotta finish this book, and they were like, fine. And they finished it in this really dumb way. Well,
you kept telling me about the Facebook algorithm and then other things and whatever. And then at one point I was like, what book? And you were
said, are you still reading the same book?
And you were like, yeah, it's all the same book. And I'm like, what? This is one book you've been talking about for a couple weeks?
At one point where they're on a prairie, and it's but it goes back in history too, so it tells a lot of the family's stories, and they all are important to bring up, but it's irresponsible the way it bounces around. Anyway.
Second Oprah book I read this year, and I think this is so smart because Oprah, A, can really do no wrong, but B, she...
I don't know. I can't name a thing.
I can't name a thing. But she has basically paired with these other writers that are, if Arthur Brooks were to write a book, it might do okay, but you put Oprah's name on it, and so many more people are going to read it, and this is great things that people need to read. Same with the other one that she paired up with another writer.
Yeah.
And so it's a great way to get these out to a much larger audience. Build the life you want. The art and science of getting happier. And I didn't like this one as much as I like the other one, but there's still so much good in this one about how there is no happy. You will never be happy, but you can always be getting happier. And there's different exercises.
That sounds really dark.
Basically
that's no happy.
But I mean, you will never just be happy all the time.
It's kind of the to-do list. They never end.
Right, exactly. But you can work on getting happier.
Well, I think it's also, not having read it, but one thing I think about a lot is, like with laundry, LOL, with to-do lists, with happiness, and with working out. It's a continuous thing.
Right.
You never get to a point where you're like, and I'm happy, or I'm fit, and that's that, and I'll stay this way forever, or and I got the to-do list on the laundry. It is always a continuous process.
But it talks about
never-ending.
Where family comes in and how friends come in and your own, what the things you think about. And one of the biggest things that Oprah talks about in this book was how her biggest takeaway was that emotions are going to happen. You're going to have emotions no matter what. And then it's how you react to your emotions that make your life better or worse. So you might be jealous, you might be angry, you might be this and the other, and something happens to you and you have these emotions, and then it's up to you to decide what you want to do with those emotions. And it was really good.
That one's on my list for sure. You read me a few passages out of there that spoke to you, and I was like, ooh, yeah, that sounds like a book I like.
Anyway, definitely recommend that. Alice in Wonderland. Just watch the movie. It really was. There's a lot of times where you read the book like that was nothing like the movie. It's exactly the movie. Like they just took that and like even sequentially, it's exactly the same. Okay. It was fun though. But again, I read it because it was really quick and I needed to get to my goal. And then I only have one more. So
I have two more. Okay, mine are really fast. Dear Dolly by Dolly Alderton. It's a collection. So I'd never heard this term, an agony aunt. Someone that like kind of Dear Abby or whatever, where you'd like write into a newspaper person and they would like, I need advice, my best friend, whatever. That's the term for it. Genius. Anyway, she is, I think, my age. And so she's giving a lot of advice. My only thing, it's a collection of like some of her best because she writes for somewhere in the UK, a newspaper. My only issue with it was someone my age giving advice to people about their life and their kids, and she's giving advice to people that are in their 70s, and I feel like she doesn't have the life experience and gravitas to properly give advice on some of it. I do think a lot of her advice was great, so it's not that she's not good at what she does, but it just did, and she's pretty tongue-in-cheek about that, is that the right term? Where she's aware that she hasn't. So she does talk about that, like in the intro, like, I know I haven't had all these experiences, blah, blah, blah. But it definitely does, like, as I'm reading it, I'm like, well, I mean, but you don't have kids. Like, it's hard to give advice to someone if you don't know what that feels like.
Yeah.
That sounds like I'm excluding, but anyway. That is my honest feeling after finishing it.
Well, I will say, people who are not parents are always the best parents.
Well, and we were great parents before we were parents. Like we had it all figured out. Yeah, that's
all right, so this is my last one. It's actually what I'm reading right now. I'm not even halfway through it yet, but it's really good. It's called Big Bang, and it's basically everything that led up to the JFK assassination and how that was sort of the next Big Bang and how it changed everything. Like it was basically pre-JFK assassination and post, and how that changed so many different people's viewpoints on things and how it changed society and the cultural zeitgeist as a whole from that moment on. But it's fascinating because Elvis is one of the characters, Jimi Hendrix, it talks about Watergate, it talks about so many, like CIA, it talks about all these things that happened in like the 50s and 60s. So if you grew up during that era, or if you find that era fascinating, it's definitely, so far, like I said, I haven't finished it yet, but the first half is really interesting.
Mm-hmm. My last book was Kevin Hart, This Is How We Do It, a pep talk. Okay, it's like 60 pages. I think it's like an Amazon original or something, and I'm assuming it's an audiobook, especially reading it. That's like, I need to see, this is what I mean. We read a really short, 60 pages. It was a cute, like, pep talk, but it was nothing earth-shattering. Yeah. I like Kevin Hart. Like, he makes me laugh. He seems like a really kind person, and that definitely comes through in the book, but,
Reminds me of... what is it? Curb Your Enthusiasm, when Jason Alexander comes out with a book and it's like a pamphlet. Anyway, it doesn't matter. All right, we did it.
Yep.
This year we've got to do one of these in like June so that we can
Did we do one in June this year?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. So I think 2 years ago we did one in June, and then it didn't have to be an hour-long video. We could do two.
Well, I am planning, selfishly, you not included, I'm planning to do like every other month, maybe even every month, a sit-down chat about books I've been reading. Because I had mentioned it in one of my videos that I wanted to talk about books more, but I was like, I'm not a booktuber. We're not like, so I feel like I don't talk about books the way like someone that does this all the time does. But a lot of people commented on that video and said, that's actually more beneficial because I'm not someone that reads 100 books a year So it's almost nice to hear, like, what does a layman think of this book?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Versus, it almost helps put the books in a better perspective versus someone that's just reading for a living, question mark? I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess it depends. Anyway.
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out.
But I could still do a roundup with you. It wouldn't, and it might be helpful to see a big 6-month roundup if I'm talking about it monthly.
Okay, we'll figure it out.
It's my own thing.
Anyway, this is the last video of the year.
And if you watched all of our Vlogmas, this is kind of like an extension of Vlogmas because we kept referencing it, but we vlogged all month long in December. So if you didn't see it,
lots of videos.
We'll link the Vlogmas playlist. They're all on there, all 25 of them, something like that.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. Yeah. This marks the end. See you next year.
All right. See you guys next year.